For the ancient Egyptians, death was not the opposite of life. It was a continuation of existence under far more dangerous conditions. Life on earth was temporary and fragile, but the afterlife was eternal and unforgiving. The greatest fear was not physical death itself, but the possibility of ceasing to exist forever. To avoid this fate, the Egyptians created one of the most complex religious systems in human history, and at its center stood the sacred funerary texts, later known as the Book of the Dead. The modern name, Book of the Dead, is misleading. It suggests a single volume focused on death, darkness, or decay. In reality, the ancient Egyptians called these texts the Book of Coming Forth by Day. This name reveals their true purpose. The dead were meant to rise again, to move freely between worlds, and to exist eternally in light rather than darkness. These texts were guides, not prophecies, and survival manuals rather than prayers. The origins of these texts lie in Egypt's earliest dynasties. During the Old Kingdom, around 2400 BCE, funerary knowledge was reserved exclusively for the pharaoh. The pyramid texts, carved deep into the stone walls of royal pyramids, contained spells that allowed the king to ascend to the heavens and join the gods. Ordinary people were excluded from this promise. Eternal life was a privilege of divine kingship. As centuries passed, Egyptian religious thought began to change. During the Middle Kingdom, access to the afterlife expanded. Sacred spells began to appear on wooden coffins rather than pyramid walls. These coffin texts allowed nobles and high officials limited participation in the afterlife. This shift marked a revolutionary moment in human belief. Immortality was no longer restricted to a single ruler. It became something that could be earned. By the New Kingdom beginning around 1550 BCE, this evolution reached its peak. Funerary texts were now written on papyrus scrolls and placed directly inside tombs. Anyone with sufficient wealth could commission their own version. These personalized collections of spells are what modern scholars refer to as the Book of the Dead. There was no standard version. Each scroll reflected the beliefs, resources, and hopes of the individual it was created for. To understand why these texts were considered essential, one must understand how the Egyptians viewed the human soul. They believed a person was not a single unified being, but a collection of spiritual components that had to remain intact after death. The physical body, known as the khat, served as an anchor. Without it, the soul could not function. This belief made mummification a necessity rather than a ritual. The ka was the life force, sustained by offerings of food and drink. The ba represented personality, movement, and identity, capable of traveling between the living world and the afterlife. The ak was the final, transformed spirit, achieved only if all other elements successfully reunited. Death shattered this balance. The Book of the Dead existed to restore it. Without guidance, the afterlife was chaos. The dead awoke in a realm filled with threats, confusion, and hostile forces. The Book of the Dead provided precise instructions: which words to speak, which names to remember, which paths to follow, and which dangers to avoid. Knowledge was not symbolic. It was literal survival. Every spell served a purpose. Some protected the body from decay. Others allowed the ba to return safely. Many spells were designed to repel demons, serpents, and executioners who roamed the afterlife. Some spells even allowed the deceased to transform into animals, plants, or divine beings to escape danger. The importance of names cannot be overstated. In Egyptian belief, knowing a being's true name gave power over it. Gates, guardians, and monsters each demanded specific names before allowing passage. The Book of the Dead preserved these names so the deceased could speak them aloud and move forward. Silence meant destruction. The ultimate test awaited in the Hall of Two Truths, the place of judgment. This was not a metaphorical trial, but a literal court presided over by Osiris, god of the dead. 42 divine judges represented moral laws that governed the universe. The soul was required to declare innocence before each one. At the center of this judgment stood the scale. On one side lay the heart of the deceased. On the other rested the feather of Mat, symbolizing truth, balance, and cosmic order. The heart was believed to contain memory, conscience, and moral weight. It knew every sin, every lie, and every hidden crime. If the heart was heavier than the feather, the soul faced obliteration. Beside the scale waited Ammit, a fearsome creature formed from the deadliest animals of Egypt. Ammit was not a demon of torture. She was a force of erasure. Souls deemed unworthy were devoured completely, denied any form of existence. This fate terrified the Egyptians more than any punishment. The Book of the Dead existed to prevent this outcome. Spells addressed the judges, defended the soul, and even commanded the heart itself to remain silent. Memory was dangerous. Truth could destroy. The words written on papyrus were believed to possess real power in the afterlife. Illustrations within these scrolls were not decoration. To the Egyptians, images were alive, a painted scene of the deceased. Farming in the afterlife ensured that this activity would become reality. Art and magic were inseparable. The journey did not end with judgment. Beyond the court lay a vast and unpredictable landscape filled with fire lakes, shadowy paths, and hostile guardians. Only those with knowledge could survive long enough to reach the field of reeds, the final destination of the blessed dead. Here, life continued eternally. The fields were fertile, the harvests endless, an existence free from pain, disease, and death. It was Egypt perfected, preserved forever. Yet none of this was guaranteed. Without preparation, without knowledge, and without the protection of sacred words, the soul would fail. And this is why the Book of the Dead was not optional. It was essential. Once the soul survived the initial awakening after death, its true ordeal began. The Egyptians believed that the afterlife was not a single location, but a vast and fragmented realm filled with regions of danger, judgment, and transformation. Movement was required. Remaining still meant decay. The Book of the Dead existed to ensure that the deceased could move, speak, and act in a realm where ignorance meant destruction. The most critical moment in this journey was judgment. The Hall of Two Truths was not a symbolic concept, but a real destination within the Egyptian vision of the afterlife. This hall was vast, silent, and governed by strict cosmic law. Osiris, ruler of the dead, sat enthroned as the final authority, surrounded by divine beings who observed every action and word spoken by the soul. Before the weighing of the heart could take place, the deceased had to face the 42 judges of Maat. Each judge represented a specific moral transgression. The soul was required to address them directly, naming each one and declaring innocence. This process was known as the negative confession. Though it was not a confession in the modern sense, it was a declaration of moral alignment with cosmic order. The deceased proclaimed that they had not committed acts that disrupted balance. They had not stolen, not murdered unjustly, not lied, not caused suffering, not desecrated sacred spaces, and not abused power. These statements were not prayers or requests for forgiveness. They were assertions of truth, spoken as legal testimony in a divine court. A mistake in wording, a forgotten declaration, or an incorrect name could have catastrophic consequences. Once the declarations were complete, the weighing of the heart commenced. The heart, preserved inside the mummified body, was magically summoned to the scale. Opposite it rested the feather of Maat. This moment determined eternity. No gods could intervene. No mercy could be granted. The scale reflected absolute balance. The fear surrounding this moment cannot be overstated. The Egyptians believed the heart retained memory beyond death. Every action, every thought, every hidden wrongdoing remained recorded within it. This belief explains why the Book of the Dead contained spells that directly addressed the heart, commanding it not to speak against its owner. The heart was treated as both an ally and a potential traitor. If the heart balanced evenly with the feather, the soul was declared justified. If it failed, the soul was handed over to Ammit. This creature embodied final annihilation. To be devoured by Ammit meant permanent non-existence. There was no punishment beyond this point, because there was nothing left to punish. Surviving judgment did not guarantee safety. Beyond the hall lay a dangerous and fragmented landscape that the Egyptians believed mirrored the chaos that existed before creation itself. This realm was filled with gates, caverns, rivers, and regions of fire. Each section was guarded by supernatural beings who tested the knowledge of the dead. The Book of the Dead functioned as a map through this chaos. It contained the names of gates, the identities of guardians, and the exact words required to pass. Some gates demanded the soul speak a secret name. Others required gestures, postures, or ritual declarations. Failure meant being turned back, attacked, or destroyed. Transformation spells played a vital role in survival. The deceased could assume the form of animals, birds, or divine beings to bypass danger. Becoming a falcon allowed flight. Becoming a lotus flower symbolized rebirth. Becoming a serpent allowed passage through fire. These transformations were not symbolic metaphors. They were believed to occur literally through the power of spoken words. Fire was a recurring threat in the Egyptian afterlife. Lakes of flame guarded certain regions, punishing the ignorant and unprepared. Unlike later religious traditions, fire was not purely destructive. It was purifying and protective when approached correctly. The Book of the Dead contained spells that allowed the deceased to walk through fire unharmed or command it to withdraw. Water was equally dangerous. Rivers separated realms, and drowning in the afterlife meant spiritual disintegration. Ferrymen demanded payment or knowledge before allowing passage. Once again, names were crucial. To name the ferryman correctly was to gain safe passage. Throughout this journey, the soul was never alone. Gods appeared constantly, observing, testing, or assisting. Thoth, god of wisdom and writing, recorded judgments and ensured cosmic law was followed. Anubis guided the dead through dangerous passages and oversaw the weighing of the heart. Re, the sun god, offered rebirth through daily resurrection. The Book of the Dead instructed the deceased on how to approach each deity respectfully and effectively. The role of images became increasingly important during this stage. Illustrations on papyrus scrolls were believed to activate the spells they depicted. A scene showing the deceased standing confidently before Osiris was meant to ensure success in judgment. A depiction of gates opening symbolized unhindered passage. These images were not artistic expressions. They were functional magic. Scribes held immense responsibility in this system. They copied spells by hand, often from older texts, and adapted them to the individual. Mistakes were dangerous. Archaeological evidence shows misspelled names, missing sections, and incorrect illustrations in some surviving scrolls. These errors reveal a terrifying reality. Not every soul was fully protected. Priests performed rituals that activated the Book of the Dead. Simply placing the scroll in the tomb was not enough. Spells had to be recited. Offerings had to be made. Amulets had to be placed correctly within the wrappings of the mummy. Each object served a specific function, reinforcing the text's power. The most important destination beyond judgment was the field of reeds. This was the eternal home of the justified dead. It was not an abstract paradise, but a perfected version of Egypt itself. The Nile flowed eternally. Fields were fertile. Harvests never failed. The dead worked, rested, and celebrated just as they had in life, but without suffering. Even here, the Book of the Dead remained relevant. Spells ensured protection against fatigue, hunger, and boredom. Eternal life was not passive. It required maintenance, order, and balance. The same moral principles that governed life on earth continued forever. The Egyptians believed that existence without order was worse than death. Chaos was the ultimate enemy. The Book of the Dead was humanity's attempt to impose structure on the unknown, to transform fear into preparation, and to face eternity with knowledge rather than ignorance. This belief endured for over 1,000 years, changing in form but never in purpose. The dead were not meant to wander blindly. They were meant to rise, to speak, and to live again. The journey described in the Book of the Dead could not succeed without the physical preparation of the body. To the ancient Egyptians, the afterlife was not purely spiritual. It was deeply physical. The soul needed a recognizable, preserved form to return to. This belief made mummification an absolute necessity, not a symbolic tradition. Mummification was a complex and highly ritualized process that lasted approximately 70 days. Each step was guided by religious law and magical belief. The process began with purification. The body was washed and cleansed to remove earthly impurities. This was followed by the removal of internal organs, which were believed to decay rapidly and threaten the survival of the soul. The brain was removed through the nose using specialized tools, as it was not considered the center of thought or identity. The heart, however, was left inside the body. It was essential for judgment. Without a heart, the soul could not face the scales of Ma'at, and without judgment, there could be no eternal life. The lungs, liver, stomach, and intestines were removed, purified, and stored in canopic jars, each protected by a specific deity. These organs were not discarded. They were preserved because the soul would need them in the afterlife. The body was then dried using natron, a naturally occurring salt, to remove all moisture and prevent decay. Once preserved, the body was wrapped in layers of linen. This was not a simple act. Amulets were placed between the wrappings at precise locations. Each amulet served a specific function. The scarab protected the heart. The Eye of Horus ensured healing and completeness. Other amulets guarded against fire, knives, and hostile spirits. The Book of the Dead worked alongside these objects. Words and objects reinforced each other. A spell written on papyrus had power, but when combined with an amulet and spoken ritual, that power multiplied. Egyptian religion did not separate magic, science, and faith. They were one system. Priests recited spells from the Book of the Dead during funerary ceremonies. These recitations activated the text, transforming written words into living protection. The opening of the mouth ceremony restored the senses of the deceased, allowing them to see, hear, speak, and breathe in the afterlife. Without this ritual, the soul would remain trapped in silence. The tomb itself was designed as an eternal house. Walls were painted with scenes that mirrored those found in the Book of the Dead. Farming, feasting, worshiping gods, and journeying safely through the afterlife were all depicted to ensure these events would occur. Tomb art was not decorative. It was functional magic. Archaeological discoveries have revealed hundreds of Book of the Dead scrolls, each unique. Some are brief and modest, created for artisans or minor officials. Others are vast, richly illustrated works commissioned by elite individuals. The most famous example, the papyrus of Ani, stretches over 75 feet and contains some of the most detailed illustrations of judgment and afterlife rituals ever found. These discoveries reveal something deeply human. The fear of death was universal, but so was hope. Even imperfect scrolls with errors and missing spells show an unwavering belief that preparation mattered. The Egyptians believed effort itself held power. Over time, the Book of the Dead gradually faded from use. New religious ideas emerged during the late period and Greco-Roman rule. Yet the core belief endured. Death required preparation. Knowledge was protection. Moral balance determined fate. Modern interpretations often reduce the Book of the Dead to superstition or primitive magic. This view misunderstands its purpose. The text represents one of humanity's earliest attempts to confront mortality systematically. It created rules where there was fear, order where there was chaos, and meaning where there was uncertainty. The Book of the Dead did not promise immortality without responsibility. Eternal life required ethical behavior, ritual precision, and respect for cosmic order. In this sense, it was not merely a funerary text, but a moral framework that shaped Egyptian society itself. For over 1,000 years, generations copied these spells, trusting that words could carry them beyond death. They believed that silence was the greatest danger and that to speak was to exist. The Book of the Dead ensured that no soul would face eternity unprepared. It stands today as one of the most profound documents ever created, not because it explains death, but because it reveals how deeply humans desire continuity, meaning and order beyond their final breath. For the ancient Egyptians, death was not darkness. It was a journey, and the Book of the Dead was the map,